There's certainly been no immediate evidence that Israel is planning to do anything differently in the wake of the ICJ, International Court of Justice interim ruling last Friday, which ordered Israel to do to take heed of six provisional measures. Certainly the verbal reaction from the Prime Minister and senior members of the cabinet was this is a disgraceful ruling and Israel is in no way guilty of the things that it is being accused of being guilty of. And if it's not guilty of them, how can it stop doing them? Because it is Israel's position that it wasn't doing them in the first place. And certainly no evidence over the weekend and into the first couple of days of this week that the war is being waged with any less vigor. Professor Neve Gordon joins us now, Professor of International Law and Human Rights at Queen Mary University of London, a specialist on Israeli politics and author of the recently published Human Shields, A History of People in the Line of Fire. Neve, good afternoon. Thank you very much for making time for us.
Thank you for inviting me, John.
Do you think that there is a conversation happening at senior levels of the Israeli cabinet, the Israeli war room, about trying to do things in a way that might be interpreted as doing things differently?
I think there must be some conversations. I think that the ruling was, what Israel was afraid of was that the judges would immediately suspend any hostilities between the two parties, would demand a ceasefire. So Israel at first understood the ruling as a win. But as the hours passed, slowly people began to understand that in order to carry out the six other provisional measures, actually they would have to either totally suspend hostilities or really contract them and reduce the level of hostilities. And then they started to blame the court for being anti-Semitic and to try to defend their actions through blaming the court and blaming anyone that supports the court order. However, as you said in the beginning, what we've seen over the past few days since the ruling is that the bombing continues, the level of death in the Gaza Strip continues. Israel is attacking UNRWA and trying to convince governments to stop funding UNRWA, which will only increase the starvation and famine in the Gaza Strip. And even today, we actually see undercover units entering a hospital in Jenin in the Northwest Bank, dressed up as doctors, dressed up as nurses, dressed up as people visiting the hospital with their automatic weapons, entering a room and executing 3 people in that room. So all of this is part of what the South African application tried to stop, and it seems like it's not stopping. And I think the reason is because Netanyahu himself, politically, as a leader, depends on the ongoing war and depends on some of his partners in the coalition that want the war to continue, and therefore he's not going to stop it despite the ruling.
Yeah, the New York Times is reporting today, and it has been reporting on this for a few days now, that representatives from the U.S., from Israel, from Egypt and Qatar have been negotiating. They've been having talks in I think it's in Paris, and they are proposing a 6-week pause in the war in Gaza and an exchange of prisoners and hostages, and the hostage number to be released put at 100. This hasn't yet, I understand, been put to Hamas, and I don't know what Hamas' response would be, but it would provide a very, if this were to come into effect relatively soon, it would be a fairly significant win for Israel, because it would then mean that they would be able to report in a month's time to the UN that, look, we haven't killed anybody because we haven't been fighting. What do you think the chances are of this 6-week pause happening?
Well, I have no idea. I do know that I think we want that pause, and regardless of what Israel will report afterwards, because any pause and any ceasefire is good for the population of the Gaza Strip, and we would like the pause. We would like the release of I think we would like the release of the hostages in Gaza and the release of the thousands of Palestinians held by Israel. I think the demands, from what I've been reading, is the demands that Hamas are making are greater, and they would like a substantial number of prisoners released, and they would like Israeli forces also to evacuate the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu is currently saying that Israeli forces will not leave the Gaza Strip and there will be no massive release of Palestinian prisoners. So that's the headline I just read 10 minutes ago. So I think it's not clear where these negotiations are going. I think it's a bit early. But anyone who cares for the people in Gaza, cares for the hostages, and cares for the Palestinian prisoner would like an agreement, I think, to shape and the sides to agree.
Neither of us has any insight into the exact nature of the discussions that have been happening between American authorities, Israel's main backer still, what Blinken's been saying to Netanyahu, what Biden might have been saying in telephone calls to Netanyahu, but we're told that the Americans have been trying to persuade the Israelis to be more surgical in their attempts to get rid of the Hamas leadership, and also to persuade them to be quicker. Israel's position is we have to inspect every truckload of humanitarian aid that goes into Gaza, because these truckloads can be used to convey war material to Hamas and other fighters within the Gaza Strip, and we can't allow that to happen. And we're told that America's been trying to persuade Israel to be more surgical in its strikes and to be more generous in the number of trucks that allows in, to slow down, to hurry up the inspection times and so on. And this was perhaps an opportunity. ICJ ruling was perhaps an opportunity for Israel to do that, but if they are planning to do it, there's no evidence of it yet.
Absolutely. I think the U.S. is now afraid of being judged as complicit with genocide, and therefore it wants Israel to stop its wholesale bombing of civilians and civilian objects. Israel has destroyed all the universities in the Gaza Strip. It has destroyed almost half the schools in the Gaza Strip. So even when the fighting ends, many hundreds of thousands of school children will not have schools to go to. It has destroyed about 2/3 of the hospitals, and where the UN is saying that there very well might be famine in the Gaza Strip, and Israel's not allowing the humanitarian aid. So the United States, I don't think, wants to be seen as complicit with this, and therefore trying to shape the way Israel's fighting the war. At the same time, the United States, I think, is also worried and concerned about the geopolitical impact of this war on the Middle East, and does not want the war to spread to other countries. And yet we're already seeing the bombings from the Houthis in Yemen. We're seeing American soldiers attacked in Jordan. We're seeing American attacks in Syria, in Iraq, and we're seeing Israeli attacks in Lebanon and in Syria. And we're seeing Pakistan and Iran exchanging attacks. And so I think the Americans are extremely worried about the impact of the war on the whole geopolitical situation, on trade. There's corporate interests here also, and it would like this war to end. At the same time, the contradiction is that Netanyahu is dependent on this war for his political career. And there's several extreme right-wing parties, or one extreme right-wing party that's in the coalition with him, and that he depends on. And this party would actually is saying still after the ruling that it would like to ethnically cleanse the Gaza Strip and reestablish Jewish settlements there.
And there we must leave it. Professor Neve Gordon, thanks very much for making time for us, professional of international law and human rights at Queen Mary University of London.